My name is Amelia, though in my younger days, people used to call me Millie, a name as light and playful as the girl I once was. When I look back now, sitting in this worn chair with the weight of years upon my shoulders, I sometimes wonder if that Millie still lives somewhere deep inside me, or if she was buried long ago under layers of sacrifice, heartache, and time. I was born in a small town, the kind where everyone knew everyone and secrets had no place to hide. My father was a carpenter, his hands always covered in sawdust, his clothes smelling faintly of pine and cedar. My mother was a homemaker, gentle and quiet, her love sewn into every curtain, every meal, every hug. Life was simple then. We didn't have much, no fancy cars, no big house, but we had each other. And in those days, that felt like more than enough. As a girl, I dreamed of love the way children dream of fairy tales. I imagined a man who would hold my hand as we walked under the stars, who would whisper promises into the dark, who would build a life with me, brick by brick, dream by dream. And then one day, I met Charles. He was taller than most boys in town, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, kind but with a spark of mischief that drew people in. And how he could make me laugh. I was only 19 when he first noticed me. I remember the exact moment. It was at the summer fair, the air thick with the smell of fried dough and roasted peanuts, the sound of children's laughter echoing through the evening. I was helping at the lemonade stand, wearing a dress my mother had sewn for me, light blue with tiny white flowers. Charles walked up, a crooked smile playing on his lips. "Well now," he said, his voice smooth. "If it isn't the prettiest girl in town selling the sourest lemonade." I felt my cheeks burn. "It's not sour," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. "It's perfectly sweet." "Then I'll have a glass," he said, dropping a coin into the jar. "And if it's as sweet as you say, maybe I'll come back for another." It was silly, really, just words exchanged over a paper cup of lemonade. But from that moment on, Charles was never far from my thoughts. The weeks that followed were a blur of small-town courtship. Walks along the riverbank, dances at the church hall, long talks under the stars where Charles spoke of dreams bigger than our little town. He wanted to own a business someday, to make something of himself, to give his future family more than what he had growing up. And me? I just wanted him, his laughter, his warmth, his hand in mine. We were married 2 years later, in a simple ceremony at the church. My dress wasn't new. It had belonged to my cousin before me, but I didn't care. When I walked that down the aisle and saw Charles waiting at the end, his eyes shining with something that looked a lot like love, I believed I was the luckiest woman alive. The house we moved into after our wedding was small, just 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of the wood smoke from our stove. But to me, it felt like a castle. I decorated it with lace curtains and painted the walls myself. Charles promised me that someday we'd have something bigger, better. I didn't doubt him. I would have followed him anywhere. I look back now and I see how much of myself I poured into that marriage, how every dream I had became tied to his, how I bent and folded myself around his needs, his ambitions, his happiness. But at the time, it didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like love. I remember standing in that little kitchen one evening, flour dusting my apron, as Charles walked in from work. His shoulders slumped, his face tired. But when he looked at me, he smiled. "You make this house a home, Millie." I don't know what I'd do without you." Those words carried me through so many long nights. For years, we were happy. Or, at least, I believed we were. We laughed, we dreamed, we built a life. When the first cracks appeared, I was too blind, too in love to see them for what they really were. But that is a story for another chapter. When I look back now, I realize the change didn't happen overnight. No, it was gradual, like a hairline crack in a window pane. At first, it's invisible. You touch the glass, and it feels solid, safe, whole. But then, over time, the crack deepens, spreads, until one day the pane shatters, leaving nothing but jagged edges that cut when you try to hold on. That was my marriage. For many years after our wedding, Charles and I lived in what I believed was happiness. We didn't have riches, but we had each other. And isn't that what love is meant to be? Waking up beside someone and knowing no matter what storms come, you'll weather them together? I held on to that belief even when the storms began to gather. Charles worked long hours at the factory. At first, I admired him for it. His dedication, his determination to give us more than what we had. He'd come home late, smelling of oil and smoke, and I'd have dinner waiting for him on the table. He'd smile, kiss my cheek, and for a while, that was enough. But then the smiles became less frequent, the kisses shorter. He started coming home later, sometimes after midnight. I'd sit by the window, lamp burning low, waiting for the sound of his boots on the porch. When I asked where he'd been, he'd brush it off. "Work, Millie, always work. You want that bigger house, don't you?" I'd nod, ashamed for even questioning him. Of course I wanted that house. Of course I wanted a better life. And if it meant he had to work late, who was I to complain? But deep down, I felt it. A shift, a distance growing between us like an unseen wall. The first time I truly suspected something was wrong was a Saturday afternoon. Charles said he had errands to run in town. Hours passed, and he didn't return. When he finally walked through the door, I caught a faint whiff of perfume clinging to his shirt. It wasn't mine. My heart stuttered, but I said nothing. Maybe he brushed past a lady in the store. Maybe I was imagining it. That's what I told myself, because the alternative, that the man that I had given my heart, my life, my very youth to, could be betraying me, was too painful to face. The signs became harder to ignore. Phone calls he took outside, his voice hushed. Weekends at work that stretched into entire nights away. The way his eyes no longer lingered on me, the way his laughter no longer reached me. I asked once, timidly, as we sat across the dinner table, "Charles, is everything all right between us?" He didn't even look up from his plate. "You worry too much, Amelia." And that was the end of it. I tried to hold on tighter. I baked his favorite pies, wore the dresses he once said he loved. I waited up for him even when my eyelids felt like lead. I prayed, how I prayed, that it was just a phase, that my Charles, my husband, the man who had once looked at me like he was his whole world, would come back to me. But prayer cannot change a heart that has already left. The truth came crashing down one bitter winter's evening. I had gone into town to fetch some fabric for sewing. As I passed by the cafe, laughter drifted out. A familiar laugh. His laugh. Curiosity, or perhaps some instinct, made me glance inside. And there he was. Charles. My Charles. sitting at a corner table with a young woman I had never seen before. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her hair was golden, her skin fresh, her smile dazzling. And the way he looked at her, oh God, the way he looked at her was the way he had once looked at me, with admiration, with hunger, with love. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the bundle of fabric. I turned away quickly, hoping he hadn't seen me, my vision blurred with tears. I walked home in the cold, my breath catching in sobs that tore from my chest. That night, when he came home, smelling faintly of her perfume again, I couldn't bring myself to ask, because I already knew. Weeks later, the truth became undeniable. He sat me down one evening, his face blank, his voice steady. "Amelia," he said, "I'm leaving." The world stopped. Just stopped. "Leaving? What do you mean?" "There's someone else. Someone who makes me feel alive again. I've wasted too many years pretending to be happy, and I can't do it anymore." I stared at him, unable to breathe. "Charles, I gave you my life. I built everything around you. How can you—" He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm marrying her. It's done." And just like that, 20 years of marriage, of love, of sacrifice were tossed aside like they were nothing. I didn't beg him to stay. Perhaps some women would have. Perhaps some would have fought for their marriage, clung to what was slipping away. But in that moment, staring at the man who had once promised me forever, forever was a lie. So I let him go. But the pieces of me that broke that night have never fully healed. The day Charles left, the house itself seemed to collapse in on me. The walls, once filled with laughter and arguments and shared meals, suddenly felt cavernous and hollow. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of his boots. Every chair sat too empty, too quiet. I wandered from room to room, my hands brushing over furniture we had once chosen together, photographs that now felt like cruel lies staring back at me. For the first time in years, I realized how large the silence could be. It pressed against my ears, suffocating. At night, the bed was the worst. For 2 decades, I had slept beside him, sometimes close, sometimes with a gulf of distance between us, but always knowing he was there. Now, lying in that cold bed alone, I felt like half a person. I would reach out in the dark, instinctively, my fingers brushing against nothing but the flat sheet, and each time the emptiness cut deeper. The world outside seemed to know. Neighbors whispered when I passed by. Women looked at me with pity, men with curiosity. At the market, hushed voices followed me down the aisles. "That's Amelia. Charles left her, for that young girl." The words sliced through me. I wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't know the whole story, that I was more than the woman who had been abandoned. But my voice stayed trapped inside, locked away by shame. I had always been Amelia the wife, Amelia the partner. Without him, who was I? One Sunday, I tried to go to church, thinking perhaps prayer would bring me peace, but as I sat in the pew, heads turned. Some offered me sympathetic smiles, others avoided my eyes altogether. I felt exposed, like every hymn sung was a lament for my broken marriage.
I slipped out before the service ended, the tears blurring my sight as I hurried home. Loneliness is not just the absence of people, it's the absence of being wanted. And that was the heaviest weight of all, knowing that the man who once swore to love me forever had chosen someone else, someone younger, someone better. Nights turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still the ache lingered. But even in the darkest corners, small sparks of light appeared. My neighbor, Mrs. Langley, an elderly widow herself, began stopping by. She'd bring soup or bread or simply sit with me while the clock ticked between us. She didn't ask questions, didn't press. She just stayed. And sometimes that was enough. One evening, as we sat by the fire, she said softly, "Amelia, men can walk away, but you?" She touched my hand. "You still have yourself. Don't let him take that too from you." Her words lodged in my heart, though I didn't know what to do with them yet. I began writing in a journal. At first, it was just scraps of anger, pages soaked with tears. But slowly, words turned into reflections, into memories of who I had been before Charles. A young girl with dreams, a woman with laughter, a soul with worth. It wasn't healing yet, but it was something. Still, the nights were long. I dreamed of him sometimes. Dreamed he came back, knocking on the door, saying he had made a mistake. I would wake up, my heart pounding, only to be met with the cruel reality of silence. And every time, it felt like losing him all over again. The heaviest blow came when word reached me that Charles had remarried the young woman from the cafe. They had a grand wedding, people said. She wore white, he looked dashing, and guests whispered about how happy they looked together. I sat in my kitchen that day, the kettle whistling on the stove, and felt the final thread snap inside me. He hadn't just left me, he had replaced me. And yet, as the tears spilled once more, I realized I was still here. Bruised, broken, humiliated, but still breathing. Still standing. And maybe, just maybe, there was a life waiting for me beyond the ruins of my marriage.
They say the human heart can only break so many times before it becomes unrecognizable. For a while, I believed that. I thought my heart was nothing more than shattered glass, sharp edges cutting me every time I tried to hold it together. But I was wrong. What I learned is that the heart is like a garden. Left untended, it withers. Left in the shadows, it grows weeds. But given light, water, care, it can bloom again. And slowly, painfully, mine did. At first, it was small things. I started walking to the park each morning. Not far, just down the lane, where the oak trees lined the path and the birdsong filled the silence. For the first time in months, I felt air in my lungs that wasn't heavy with grief. I began planting flowers in the garden again. Roses, daisies, tulips. The kind Charles always said were a waste of time. As my hands dug into the soil, I remembered who I was before him. Amelia. A girl who loved beauty, who found joy in colors bursting from the earth. I painted the kitchen walls a soft yellow. I bought a new quilt for my bed. Small changes, but each one felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. One afternoon, Mrs. Langley brought over a book club flyer. "You should come," she urged. "It'll be good for you." At first, I resisted. What did I have to offer?
But she persisted, and eventually I went. The first meeting was awkward. I sat in the corner, hands folded, listening more than speaking. But as the weeks passed, I found myself laughing again, sharing opinions, even disagreeing passionately about characters and endings. And in those moments, I realized something stunning. I still had a voice. But the true turning point came unexpectedly. I was shopping in town when I saw Charles. He was walking hand in hand with his young wife, their arms linked, their faces lit with laughter. For a moment, my breath caught. Old wounds tore open, memories of betrayal flooded back. But then, I looked closer, and I saw him. Not the man I had once adored, but the man he had become. His hair was thinning, his laughter forced, his eyes darting nervously when he noticed me. And her smile, well, it wasn't adoration, it was possession. They passed by without a word, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No pain, no longing. Just release. That night as I sat by the fire, I whispered to myself, I survived him. Those words became my anchor. From then on, my life began anew. I joined the church choir again, my voice shaky at first, then stronger with each hymn. I volunteered at the community center, teaching children how to bake bread, how to sew buttons, how to find joy in simple things. Their laughter filled the spaces in me that had been hollow for too long. And I wrote, page after page in my journal, until one day I realized I wasn't writing for myself anymore. I was writing for others, for women like me who had been left behind, abandoned, broken. So I gathered my courage and shared my words. At first, just at the book club, then at the church. Then, astonishingly, at a small town gathering where women listened with tears in their eyes. "You've given me hope," she whispered, clutching my hand. And in that moment, I knew my pain had become my power. Years passed. I grew older, my hair silver, my face lined. But I was not the woman Charles had discarded. I was Amelia, the woman who had risen from betrayal to build a life of her own choosing. And when I sat in my garden, surrounded by roses blooming brighter than ever, I felt a peace deeper than any I had known in marriage. Sometimes people still whispered about me. "That's Amelia. Her husband left her, you know." But I smiled when I heard it, because they didn't know the whole story. Yes, my husband left me, but what they should be whispering, what they should be shouting is this: she survived, she endured, she rose again. And that, my dear ones, is the end of my story. A story not of loss, but of rebirth. Because love can break you, but it can also teach you the strength you never knew you had.